Hi everyone. This week we're talking about Plato Symposium, which is really can be read just as a sort of really great work of literature. You get some really amazing speeches in the praise of love here, but also there's a really important philosophical idea in here, and what I'm going to focus on is this idea of love as yearning for something we don't have, and love ultimately being of beauty itself and wisdom itself and goodness itself. And that notion's pretty bizarre. So I'm going to sort of try to walk through that. And then there's other videos you can find very easily with a simple Google search. They'll explain a lot of the other plot elements of the story. So when we get into it, this is the cast of speakers, not the cast of everyone who appears, but these are just the people in the order of the speeches they give. I'm not going to talk much about them right now. There's a question on the quiz that's going to ask you to match them to the theme of their speech. So make sure that you're able to do that. It's one of the benefits of not having to memorize this and then go to class. You can go back and look, take notes, use them. I don't care if you use notes while you answer the quiz, and in fact you should. Okay, we get this progression of discussion, and to some extent you could basically leave out the first speech by Phaedrus. Super short. It's basically love is all good. But then we get this. You could see the different types of speeches that are given. The first is, the first main one is that love's not always good, right? It's a pretty easy idea to understand that if you're infatuated with somebody, you might make a fool of yourself chasing after them. You might engage in a lot of sort of shameful acts to try to win them over, that kind of thing. But maybe there's another kind of love that is better. Then we're going to get a speech about love is actually a harmony, and that's a sort of important notion. I'll talk more about that towards the end of this video. You get this great speech about love being a quest for our other half. It is actually one of the places that we find the beginning of this idea of love as being in the search for your soulmate. And then we come back to this idea that like love makes us better. It's the creator of virtues. And it's an interesting point because it gets us thinking about true love, right? Is there such a thing? Is all love true love, right? Or is true love only the love that sort of makes you better, that kind of thing? And I want you guys to think about this a little bit because I think there's lots of things to debate here, right? That some would say, like, if you love somebody, you love somebody. It doesn't, it's not always healthy when you're in love. But you're going to get this argument here and in the earlier speech that actually true love is a healthy kind of love. That's going to lead up to Socrates' speech that love is longing for what we don't have. And I'm going to talk about that at some length here in a sec. So Socrates, he begins, Agathon gives this speech saying love is amazing. And Socrates is going to say, well, I went to this priestess, Diotima, who taught me about love and sort of almost made fun of me because my view was just like yours, Agathon. But she helped me see that love is not beautiful because love has to be love of something. And so if love is love of something, it's not that love is beautiful, but love loves the beautiful. And if love is yearning for something, you don't yearn for what you have, you yearn for what you don't have. So now instead of them praising the God of love, all of a sudden there's this shift, and now we're talking about what love, the verb, really means, and it gets defined as yearning for something we don't really have, and so constantly chasing something. And it's important to note here that the actual word philosophy means philo, it's a form of love, Sophia, love of wisdom. And it's not the possession of wisdom, it's the chasing after wisdom. And the idea is that this kind of chasing after wisdom, in fact, makes us better. So, if you go and you do a Google search for Symposium, Socrates, videos. You'll see tons of videos about this idea of what's called the ladder of love. And the idea for Socrates is that we begin by loving another person's individual body, and then, over time we learn to appreciate beauty in people generally, right? We can just appreciate the beauty of human beings, or of beautiful human beings. Then we can appreciate sort of the beauty that someone might have on the inside. Socrates is actually legendarily ugly, but obviously we're going to see Alcibiades comes in at the end and praises Socrates for being amazingly beautiful. Why? Because it's his soul, his character that's beautiful. And then we move from that. Now notice, right? We've begun to move away from using our eyes and our senses to appreciate and to love something. And now we can turn and we can begin to direct love towards institutions and sciences. And that seems so weird, right? Thinking about like loving physics. But I think you can make sense of it, right? You might say like the idea of democracy is beautiful. The idea of justice is beautiful. Some will tell you, go talk to a math teacher. The math teacher will tell you, mathematics is elegant. It's beautiful, right? And these are the types of beauty that now are sort of like, it's our minds that are appreciating this beauty. And that leads us to this idea that the ultimate step is to have our minds be able to turn to and appreciate, quote unquote, beauty itself. And this idea of beauty itself, or the form of beauty, can be really confusing. So let's talk about that. So normally we get our ideas about what makes something good just from sort of social agreement, right? People kind of have a notion of what makes a lawyer a good lawyer, what makes a teacher a good teacher. But notice that a lot of times the qualities of a good lawyer, we think, are very different than the qualities of a good teacher. And those might be very different than the qualities of a good parent. But our understanding of all these doesn't come from thinking about what goodness is. It comes from thinking about what a parent is, or a lawyer is, or a teacher is. And those are pretty socially defined roles. And this, by the way, is something that's like all over the Meno, in the way that Meno is first answering the question, what is virtue? But what if we flipped it, and instead of thinking about what a lawyer is, we started to think about what goodness is, and we started to think about what's common to all of these, right? And so if we start thinking about, is there anything common between a good lawyer, a good parent, a good teacher? Maybe we begin to think like, well, maybe you can't be a good lawyer or a good teacher or a good parent if you're not morally good, for example. And so perhaps there is some common link to all these kinds of goodness. But we get to understand this common link, if one exists, not by thinking about those roles, but by thinking about the idea of goodness, goodness itself. And it might seem weird to think about goodness itself apart from thinking about it sort of within like a good person. But Plato's whole idea is that thinking about these forms, this idea of goodness itself, actually helps us better understand what it is to be a good person or a good teacher, a good lawyer, because we begin to think about like, well, what does goodness really mean? And that might help us rise above socially accepted notions, right? So we might think, well, a good lawyer is just someone who wins the case at any cost, no matter what. And maybe that's just agreed upon. But maybe you realize that like, well, that doesn't seem to be a sufficient understanding of a good lawyer, because perhaps I shouldn't strive to be a lawyer who wins at all costs, but a lawyer who is both skillful and moral. And it's only by thinking about what true goodness is that maybe you can rise above the normal social expectations of that role. What's really interesting, though, about the symposium is that it's not just about what Plato thinks love is ultimately of, right? Love of wisdom, beauty, goodness themselves, but also this idea that like learning to love beauty and justice and wisdom and goodness is a process. We can't just decide to start thinking about the idea of beauty. It's just like too crazy, right? But we can we know what it is for something to be beautiful. We can appreciate the beauty of another human being, and we can begin to see beauty in things beyond individual human beings. We could slowly learn to appreciate the beauty of a science, and slowly over time, we might be able to appreciate the sort of draw of beauty of these particular ideas, like beauty and goodness and wisdom. But it takes time, and it's sort of a powerful notion that you can't just say to people, well, this table's not real. The idea of justice is what's real. That just what, right? Blows your mind. But the goal is to slowly be moved to be able to appreciate that. One of the speeches that's the weirdest in this whole dialogue is Alcibiades, because it's not one of the formal speeches. He's just a dude who's in love with Socrates, who comes barging into the party drunk towards the end. He's in love with Socrates, even though Socrates is crazy ugly. So then we wonder, okay, why is he so in love with Socrates? And I think the interesting notion is that this quote that Socrates is the only person in the world that can make him, Alcibiades, feel ashamed. And what is it that makes him feel ashamed? Because Socrates is a beautiful person and is virtuous, and so inspires Alcibiades to want to be virtuous. But Alcibiades is like the embodiment of a typical human being, right? That often we want to be good, but we fall short. And so there's this really real experience in the dialogue of this notion that, when we strive to become better people, that doesn't necessarily make us better right away, that it really is a very human struggle. So it's a really powerful moment in the dialogue. What I want you to think about a little bit in this dialogue, I think a lot of the other videos you might watch don't necessarily discuss the idea that the dialogue might actually be itself a series of steps that all sort of get integrated into Socrates' speech. It sort of comes off at first as just a series of unrelated speeches. But if you think about them, they might be connected, right? So first, you get this idea from Pausanias that love can make us noble, but it's true love that makes us better. Then you get this idea that this act of love, right, involves a harmony, right? That we have to get our desires under control. And then it's also a search for what we do not have, right? Notice that comes up in Socrates. It's a yearning for beauty. We're not yet beautiful. We're not yet wise, so we want them. So all this might get integrated in this idea that love is a constant search for something. The highest form is the yearning for wisdom. And this search makes us better. And that's, I think, the real thing that's really interesting here. So again, philosophy is the love of wisdom. The idea here is that the search for this wisdom makes us better people. But you have this idea that it's not just an intellectual process, right? So think about the Meno, it's purely intellectual process. So if we just keep asking, what is virtue, just doing that will make us braver. But here, it's a little more visceral, right? That we can get at this sort of elevation simply by allowing ourselves to love and allowing ourselves to reflect on what love really is. And the real key is to learn to love even things that we can't see until we can love an idea like beauty itself. Last thought I want to leave you with is this idea. It's sort of a long phrase here or passage, but a lot of people would say that it's actually sort of stupid what Socrates is doing in his speech, that, we're talking about love, and by the time he's done, we've gone from loving a person to loving an idea. And some people would think that's the most sick and distorted way of thinking about love, right? You sort of have forgotten what love is because you've forgotten the very bodily nature of love and the connectedness between two people. I would just invite you guys to think that might be true, but there may be some merit in this idea that really it's really about turning our minds to think about what beauty is, that maybe we can better understand what it means for a thing or a person to truly